Right, hi everyone. So this week we're going to be looking at Indigenous wisdom and climate change. In the first part, we're going to be contextualizing the issues of two key concepts, so epistemology and ontology, particularly looking at the way in which epistemological hierarchies and ontological hierarchies have shaped the climate crisis that we face in the past and shaped the impacts of that crisis in the present. And then we will move on to the future. So looking at how we imagine the future beyond climate change. Before we define these key terms and look at how they relate to hierarchies, particularly between Westernized and Indigenous epistemologies and ontologies, we're going to look at a bit of an introductory video that will just introduce you to some voices from around the world that talk about these issues before going on to then define them, and then looking at them in the next videos in terms of the past, so the causes of climate change, the present, and then the future. And so, yeah, how we envision a future beyond and also with climate change. Before we continue, though, I of course want to acknowledge the country upon which we're on. It will be different for all of us, and also acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which our campus grounds are on, and also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded in Australia.
So I'm Louis Henderson. I'm a filmmaker and a writer.
Carolina Kaiser.
And I'm actually from the United Kingdom.
From Colombia, living in.
We are an artist duo from Bogota.
I'm actually from the United Kingdom.
From Colombia, living in.
We are an artist duo from Bogota, Colombia, and we have been working together as a collective for the last 7 years.
I was born in Madagascar.
I think you're right to say that, like, when we name things like candidacy, we name globalization, we talk about, capitalism. I think it's quite important to be clear about what those terms actually constitute. The Anthropocene, in terms of, mankind's effect on the planet, and we have to understand like which type of person that's actually talking about.
Environmental justice as an individual responsibility. I think it's a collective responsibility, a community responsibility, right? I don't see myself as an individual championing for these, but in relation to speaking with, speaking besides, supported, immediately behind those at the front lines of environmental justice. And I think there's also a heavy responsibility and governmental responsibility. And I think it's both corporations and governments have bigger guilt and have committed the biggest crimes in terms of environmental justice. And they need to be held accountable more than us as individuals and carrying this weight to go.
Is the smaller Earth half in the southern part of the planet than in the north. And nowadays, for example, there are population in at the villages that are dying from hunger because it doesn't rain anymore, etc. So in some way, I would say that this is the impact, of the exploitation of the natural resources. But depending on your point of view, this exploitation is the result of this arrogant attitude from the industries.
believe it is important to approach this problem in a different way. Maybe to reflect, for example, on the interrelationship and mutual influence of humans and the planets, to think of it in a reciprocal and two-way process. For example, that not only we as humans have geomorphic effects on the planet, but also to recognize how we ourselves are being permanently transformed and affected by the earth. We human become geology and the rock becomes humanized.
Inequality. I think inequality has to be looked at also with the present of non-human epistemologies. If we're speaking about environment, we have to take into account the non-human epistemologies too. So what are the inequalities? So not only among humanity and different parts of society, the communities within what we call humanity, but also the inequality between the different living and non-living entities that coexist in this planet.
Globalization is not necessarily something that is negative. It's ability for living persons to walk and meet others is the significance of life. Life.
I'm trying to change the conversation around, global heating to try and think more about what it means to speak about this from the position of privilege living in the overdeveloped world, to try and reconsider how we think about our role and position within this particular catastrophic moment that we're living in, and to also try and understand that there's a whole other series of perspectives that we just don't really know about, but that are extremely important to take into consideration. And and then what that means exactly is to bring that back to this question of understanding which humans are speaking about when we talk about something like the Anthropocene.
We would rather say that it is a problem of ontological superiority at all levels. Let's say the human exceptionalism and the ways in which the world is socially divided. All the hierarchies created to justify economic systems, all the different forms of exploitation are based on ontological superiority, and this is what needs to be changed. We would like to trigger questions like, what is worth more, gold or water, trees or spirits?
Okay, so as alluded to in that video, part of what we're looking at this week is contextualizing the course in the past and the impacts of the present and going into the future. So really, we are imagining the future around climate change within a series of hierarchies. And these include both epistemological, I'm going to keep struggling with that one, hierarchies and ontological hierarchies. So epistemology refers to different perspectives or paradigms about what is considered valid knowledge and how knowledge can be acquired. So for example, someone will think that knowledge is something that really has to be acquired in a way that's objective and through quantitative data or means, whilst another person will really value intuitive knowledge and maybe qualitative understandings of things. Ontological hierarchies or ontology refers to different paradigms or perspectives on the nature of things, such as the nature of existence, the nature of humanity, the nature of the world, all these things, the way in which we know the nature of something. Meaning essentially what do we believe the world is? What do we really believe people are? What do we think about nature? And what do we think about the nature of existence? And this is important because different beliefs about how we acquire valid knowledge, so epistemology, helps to explain how we have come to know the world and about what the world is, so its ontology, the nature of it. And we can also have competing epistemologies and ontologies, and we see this through a big part of what is being explored in relation to climate justice, which is how hierarchies maintain the different treatment of some epistemologies and some ontologies over others. And hierarchies between different epistemologies and ontologies have actually shaped both the causes of climate change and its current impact, and are important to interrogate and challenge if we're going to respond to climate change and the climate crisis, and also all its associated injustices. So one of the key observations here is that historically Indigenous epistemologies have been subjugated. They have often been pushed down on the hierarchy in terms of how we believe knowledge is acquired. So Western epistemologies and ontologies have tended to be elevated above those of Indigenous epistemologies and ontologies. And this is part of the reason we are where we are, which is in a state of climate crisis. So for many scholars within the area of environmental and climate justice, it's really important that their work challenges these hierarchies between Indigenous and Western ontologies and epistemologies, because an Indigenous way of coming to know and the very knowledge that they have is sometimes a process and an insight that does not just come from their own actions, but it can also come from nature. So for example, realizing that climate is not a concept, but rather something we live in and should learn from, like we would a teacher. So Indigenous Australian peoples have been learning from the climate forever. We have seen this in their expertise of First Nations peoples' involvement with bushfires, which help the land to regenerate itself. And they know exactly when, where, and how to burn based on the climate. They've used the climate to learn how to do these things. It was not of their own actions that they learned necessarily how to do these things. Climate was their teacher. And typically we see Indigenous ontologies having a more ecocentric view. So the lack of boundaries between humans and non-humans, which is why it can be really contrasted and unfortunately has been completely undermined by Western perspectives, which have more of that anthropocentric outlook that we've talked about. So meaning there are not only boundaries, but a really clear superiority of humans, which is used to justify our privilege and our benefit off of other animals and other natural resources. And of course, those through colonization and that particular outlook being normalized and more globalized, we are seeing the impacts from it, not just through climate change itself, but also through these climate injustices as well. So Western epistemologies have tended to be favoured for many reasons, but one includes the idea that objective knowledge gained through science is better than informal ways of gathering knowledge. This, however, completely ignores historical ways people have learnt for tens of thousands of years through stories and images, and really rich knowledge, the really rich knowledge that we gain through that more stimulating journey of learning. So I think there's something so human about learning something through a song that you listen to or from a friend's story. It's something very innate in us. Even when I was learning how to give lectures, a lot of lecturers said use stories because that's a great way that people learn, because we've been using stories to learn forever. And the reason I use those everyday examples is because storytelling and art is really important to most, if not all, Indigenous communities across the world, and really central to how they gain and pass on knowledge. All right, so in the next video, we will continue on with this conversation on how Western epistemologies and ontologies have shaped our current climate crisis.